Hello and welcome back to this series of mini videos that are aimed to help you plan your first TGO challenge. In the last video we looked at navigating over open land using water and watercourses as our guide, and I thought I'd follow that up by just taking one stretch of a walk and seeing how we might approach the navigation task across this open land. So in front of me we have a big area called the Balmacan Forest. There are not many tracks there. There's lots of little lochans, and we need to cross that to get from our starting point, Coogee, to Drumnadrochit here. Coogee is a very interesting place. There's probably not enough time to go into it now, but it's a very eccentric little settlement, much beloved by many challengers who stay there. So if you're planning your first route, put Coogee into Google and see what comes up. You never know, it might just be for you. So I walked this way in, I think, 2009. And for most of the way here, I walked with my young friend, Phil Turner, who actually did most of the navigation when we're on the ground. But this is kind of the way in which we planned it, in so much as we planned anything. But the way I think we look at the landscape might be some help to you, and particularly the way in which we can break this journey down into little chunks, I think helps as well. Helps take away some of the panic sometimes when you just see that open landscape in front of you. Just to give you a feeling of our bearings, Drumnadrochit is here, and if I just scroll over a bit, this loch here is Glenafric, which is often described by many people as their favourite loch in Scotland. So we are trying to get from here to here, and if I just put a little line in there, the diagonal line trick that I showed you earlier, you'll see that goes across slightly boring land. So we want to really go through this area of lochs here. And when I did it, it had been described to me by a fellow walker as a kind of almost magical kind of place. So I was quite keen to see that. So how do we go upon this? Well, I'm assuming that we've either stayed at Coogee for the night or we've been walking in this way. And the first thing we have to do is to get out into the forest itself. So let's just magnify things. I should just say that one of the beauties about Scotland is that a lot of areas that are known as forests aren't forests at all. There are no trees there. That's a story for another day. But this is the Balmacan Forest here, with its crags and its lochans. So what we're going to do is we're going to move down along this path here through the forest. A very pleasant walk. Here we've got Plodder Falls, which is a dramatic waterfall that's worth maybe taking a little detour to have a look at. Then we're going to carry on along here to this holiday complex, Hilton Lodge. And we're going to take this track that runs south-east. That's all very straightforward until we get to this waypoint here. Now the track itself carries on towards Fort Augustus. It's one of those hill tracks that I was talking about before. But we now want to head out on open ground. So you can see, if you just look at the map carefully, that from this position here, we won't be able to see these lochans, so we'll just be faced with kind of featureless land. So let's have a look at some landmarks that we can use. And the first one is this forest boundary here. So if we set course to just walk from here to there, or here, or around there, we kind of know where we are, really. So that's our first little jaunt. So we're using the forest boundary here to just fix our position. And then from here, we'll want to aim for this lock here. So if I just magnify again, this is Loch Mastak. And we're going to aim to probably stop and camp for the night here. So when Phil and I did it, this was just a half day's walk really. We had an afternoon just lounging about by the side of the loch. So, you know, if you were coming this way, you probably wouldn't have stayed at Coogee. You'd have probably stayed somewhere in Glenafric and made this more of a day. But here we've got this ridge. But from this position, it's going to be relatively straightforward to just take this walk, a simple compass bearing, and just very crudely walk up to this ridge here, or this high point, maybe not to the high point. And then, of course, at this point, we can actually see down to this loch. So the navigation down to our camp spot is relatively straightforward. And at this end of the loch, there's quite a bit of flat ground which we can camp on. So that was our first day. So literally we simply just tackled this by just fixing our position really in relation to the edge of that forest. So next day our adventures really began. And this is what we are faced with. So our start is here. And this is the track we want to take out that runs all the way down to Drumsdocket. So if I just zoom out a little bit, there's that track. And if I scroll, you can see how it runs down into these forests and into the village of Drum. So we've got to plan a route through this. So the first thing to do is to really just to break it down in stages. So from here, we want to follow this watercourse up to the high ground. This is pretty prominent. You can see that quite easy from this point. So let's just plot a route that does that. So we're just walking up here and following this through to this point here. And then we want to move northeast. So the next thing to do is to fix our next position. So we're going to walk to the end of this loch and we're going to go through this little gap here. So that's the next thing we'll do. So we'll find our way through here. So we've navigated one loch and one little pass. We're going to keep to the east or the right hand side of these lochs as we move through to make it easy to connect with this. So the next thing we're going to do is to go to the next loch. So we'll skirt around here, around these crags. And the thing about skirting around the crags is the land is likely to be firmer. It's not going to be boggy too much. So then we're going to walk around this loch in here, again sticking to slightly highish ground, crossing these little streams to here. So let's do that. So we've got these streams to cross, but they're not really a problem at all. And here we are joining up with this track. Now, I think I'm right in saying that track actually did extend a little bit further. But never mind, that's the way we've done it. So the first thing we did is to follow this stream uphill to this high ground. We don't really want to go in this direction here because it's taking us a little off course. So we'll skirt round here, bash through the heather, aim for this gap, follow the line of the crags around. And each time, of course, we're dropping down. If you look at the contours, so we're dropping down to from 600 to 500 meters. So each time you go through one of these little gaps here, actually you come across another little lake. That's why it's so magical. You're just stepping down from lake to lake to lake. So we're skirting around this one here, sticking, reasonably close to the crag's edge where we're going to avoid any boggy ground. And then we've got a reasonably short hop here to follow this track down to here. I think maybe we actually followed this stream down a bit before we joined there, but you get the point. And then from here, we're on the track all the way then into Drumnadrochit. So we're following that down here and then into Drum. Now, when Phil and I tackled this, we weren't quite sure about this terrain. Neither of us had been through it before. We camped overnight and we wanted to be in Drumnadrochit to have lunch at the pub. Now, this might seem an odd kind of objective, but on the challenge, this kind of thing really gets you after walking for 4 or 5 days through terrain that doesn't have a pub. So you do get quite excited by food on the challenge, and we got very excited by the notion of getting to the pub. And we wanted to get there nice and early. So I seem to remember we started walking about 6 in the morning to bash through so that we could get to Drumnadrochit to make sure we had enough time to have a good lunch and then do some resupply. We gave ourselves that much time because we just didn't know how hard this terrain would be. There was a lot of heather bashing, but actually after this spot here, it was reasonably easy moving. And so we plotted our route through these little passes around these crags in a way that would have helped us if the visibility had been very poor. In the event, we managed to get to Drumnadrochit before the pub opened, so we had to sit there quite miserably for about an hour, I think, before the pub opened. But there you go. We gave ourselves the time to get through the landscape because we really didn't know what we were going to face. So there you go. I hope that helps. We're looking at breaking these trips down, really, into little chunks. So just to recap, from here we use this plantation as a bit of a guide from open country. For there, it was reasonably simple compass bearing to take this high ground, which of course we could see from the edge of the forest here. From the high ground, it was pretty easy to see the loch and our camp spot. From our camp spot, we took this stream up onto the high ground here, skirted this little top, aimed for this gap here, bashed off through the heather. From there, we skirted around the edge to this next major loch, skirted around that again to the right, again sticking to what we thought would be dry ground, and then to pick up this path here. Now, I mention that because if you break it down like that, it's reasonably straightforward. When I decided I wanted to do this, I mentioned it to many experienced challengers who all said, ooh, the Balmacan forest, ooh, tricky, 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 featureless, 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 which of course meant it was more of a challenge. But actually, when you break it down like that, it gets much easier. And if you've done that well in advance, of course, when you're walking on that ground, you can be thinking in stages. So you're not so much worried about the whole journey, but you're just concentrating on getting, that bit there to that bit there sorted. So Hope that helps. That's just one way in which we can break things down, and we can use not only the water but other features of the landscape, like the plantation here, like the crags here, the little gaps through the kind of outflows of these locks. We can use these natural features to break the journey down into manageable chunks, and that should help us be more confident, feel in more control, and ultimately that should help keep us safe. In the next of these videos, I'm going to take a slightly different tack, and we're going to have a look at some of the online resources that are going to be useful to you when doing your planning.